Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to have a quick note about David Lando. As you probably know, he wasn't here last week. He's not here again today. He has had COVID. He hasn't been too well at it, but he is getting better, and he assures me that he definitely will be here next week. So you can get excited for that. In the meantime, well, let's just wish him a refuah shalema.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so Shlomo Kreiman, a retired judge, looks back on 22 years of dispensing justice. Shlomo has over 40 years' experience in the world of the law, first as a solicitor and then as a judge. A strong all-rounder with a background in the skills of interpersonal and organizational, is that the word? Organizational, yeah. Skills, is that your skills? Okay. Analysis of complex and weighty material, teamwork and energetic to drive matters forward, and performance delivery as a judgment report writer. He is a seasoned operator in independent analysis and sounds assessment with many years of working in the judiciary, which does sound very boring, but after you've heard him, you won't believe that. There will be, I hope, a lot of questions after he finishes speaking, and he loves lots of questions, even if they're very, very difficult questions. In fact, the more difficult they are, the better we can test him. So please use the remote hand in the chat rooms, but only put questions in the chat room. Please don't put statements in there because we never look at them. It's not the right thing in there. So over to you, Shlomo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. This is Edgeware broadcasting to the British Empire and beyond. Good evening, one and all. Thank you for finding some time to come and join us tonight. I've just heard probably the best eulogy that will ever be written about me in my lifetime. So thank you for those few kind words of introduction. Yes, I'm delighted to tell you that just over a year ago, I hung up my wig, as they say, and I have retired, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. And there's so many other people say, I wonder how I ever found time to go to work. But that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And by kind invitation of the powers that think they are at Edgeware Synagogue, I'm going to talk to you for a while about my judicial career and various other little bits and pieces, episodes that occurred, events that happened, people I met, and others I'd rather forget. So let's start off by talking about how a judge gets appointed, because in my professional lifetime, it has changed dramatically. Before I came into the judiciary, it was done on the basis of what they used to call the tap on the shoulder system. Now, before you think that's mixing plumbing with the judiciary, it's not. What used to happen was that there'd be an experienced advocate who would appear regularly in front of a senior judge, and at the end of a trial or something, the judge's clerk would call the advocate in, and the judge would say, had you thought about a judicial career? And it went from there. Then they began to think that perhaps that wasn't quite the fair and open way to do it. So they started advertising positions that fell vacant, and that's how I got involved in it. And I applied. We're going back now to 1997, when some of you were a bit younger than you are now. And I applied. At that time, there were 300 applications for 30 posts. The 30 posts remain advertised every other year. And at the last count, when they did this, they had some 1,400 applications. So clearly it's become a popular pastime sitting in judgment on other people. And as we come up to the season of our judgment, perhaps you can understand why. So I applied, had an interview, passed the interview, don't know quite how, and then went on a week's training course, which was held at Barnet Hill. Anybody who knows where Barnet Hill is, it's the former country house of Thomas Cook, the travel agent. It was a magnificent building, but my giddy aunt, they worked us hard for that week. Having done that, then I had to sit in with a senior judge for a week and sort of shadow him. When I say shadow, it was nothing to do with Cliff Richard. And then I got a letter from the Lord Chancellor's office telling me that I was authorised, approved, sanctioned, given the powers of the Beth Din and anything like that that was relevant, and off I went. And that was the first day I sat was an easy day to remember. It was my 43rd birthday in 1998. And just to tell you how disappointing it was at what was then Marylebone Court. It's now the site of Westminster Court. And it was a day's trial under something called the Dangerous Dogs Act. And the whole thing was whether a dog that had bitten somebody was dangerous or not. Now, I frankly thought that any cases under the Dangerous Dogs Act would automatically be sent to barking court, but that isn't what happened, and I had to deal with it. And that was my first day, and I thought, I'm not so sure that this is quite what I was looking at. But it got better, and so I went on. And then you may or may not know that judges have appraisals, very much like any other profession. And after two, my appraiser said to me, had you thought of looking for something else? And I said, no. And he said, well, if you see anything else advertised, go in for it and I'll write you a reference. And so I did. The first job I had that I was talking about before was district judge in the magistrates court, and I'll come back to that a bit later on. This was an advertisement for a judge of the Social Security and Child Support Appeal Tribunal, and I know that one of my esteemed colleagues is looking in this evening, and a very warm welcome to you, sir. So I thought, well, I'll go in for it, and lo and behold, I got an interview. I turned up at this interview and there were the three wise men sitting on the selection board. And off we went. And then one of them said to me, well, he said, in preparation for this event, I presume you've been to see one of our tribunals in action. And I sat there and I can't tell you what I thought because it's mixed company, but I thought, oh my giddy aunt, that never crossed my mind. And I decided that saying that would not exactly enhance my chances. There is this wonderful thing that we speak about called Siyata Dishmaya, the help of heaven. And the words came to me, I smiled ever so sweetly, which I do very rarely these days, but I smiled ever so sweetly and said to him, would a serious candidate do anything else? Oh, righto, he said, and they moved on with the questions. There you go. If your muzzle's in, your muzzle's in. I would have said, well, where did you go? What did you see? What did you learn? But he didn't. And 6 weeks later, another letter turned up from the Lord Chancellor, who probably didn't have a lot to do apart from sign letters to me in those times. And that was my second job. Now, neither of them were full-time, but the combination and extent of the work meant that I effectively worked at least 3 days a week, normally 4, and in the height of the summer, whatever that was, 5 days a week. So it worked out quite well. So there we are. That's what I did for 22 years. And if anybody is looking in from either Wormwood Scrubs or Pentonville, where they may have a television in the cell, I put you there for a very good reason, and there you should stay. So let me talk about the first job first, and that is that of a district judge at the magistrates court. I'm sure some of you have been in a magistrates court, and you normally see 3 people sitting on the bench, and they are magistrates. Now, there's nothing wrong with magistrates, far from it. They have, I believe, since about the 1300s, dispensed local justice. I don't mean the same three magistrates, because they'd be getting rather elderly now from 1300. But that's been the system. But gradually, it's become a balance with a professional bench. And a district judge sits on his or her own. They are the judges of the facts, the law, and also passing sentence. And it's passing sentence, which is, of course, the best bit of the whole day. So a district judge at a magistrates court deals with an enormously wide range of work, and you would probably be astonished if you went round one of the busier courts, and I think the nearest one to many of us would be Hendon, and sat in the different courts. You would be surprised at the range of work and the volume of work, because it's not an easy job. You should understand that when you walk in the morning, you're given a list. And it's a list of the people who are going to appear. There's the name, Fred Bloggs, what the allegation is, and that's it. And you basically know nothing at all about the rest of it until you actually walk into court, the case is called on, and you start going from there. In other words, you have to think very quickly. You have to move things on, ask the questions that nobody else has thought of, but which are relevant. And when I talk about the volume of work, I remember in particular the days when I used to go to Camberwell in South London, and that court no longer exists, although I should add, nothing to do with me. And it would be particularly on a Monday, when they collected all the schmai dry over the weekend, it would be nothing to have 40 to 50 people in the list on a Monday. So that was a busy day. And of course, there was no such thing as saying, well, it's 4 o'clock, it's time to go home. Nobody left until the list was completed, which could run on to 5, 6, and sometimes even 7 o'clock. So they are, you can't just sort of leave people sitting in the cells overnight and say, well, we'll deal with you tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. I did have a recent, it was then relatively recent, at Thames Court in the East End, where they had a gentleman of French extraction who was arrested for something or other and was sitting in the cells, and they waited all day to try and get an interpreter, because interpreting is big business in the court, but they couldn't. And I said, well, we'd better have him up and explain to him that he's going to have to wait overnight. And there was a bit of a flurry, and they said, well, who on earth is going to explain it? And I said, well, fortunately, I speak fluent French, as in fact as Rabbi Lister, and we often converse in French when he doesn't want other people to know what we're talking about. And so lo and behold, I did my bit for the country and spoke to the chap in French, and he was very understanding about it. I don't think he was particularly happy, but then again, well, imagine you're on the receiving end of me. Would you be happy? So let's look at the work that they do in the magistrates' court. Every criminal case starts there, from murder downwards. And I've had preliminary hearings on murder cases in front of me. One of the most famous, and some of you may remember it, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, a man called Stephen Port. And Mr. Port had, I have to be careful here, a predilection for other gentlemen. And he would invite them home. Probably they were going to sit and read Psalms together or something, I really don't know. And then he murdered them, dragged them down to the local churchyard and buried them. And this all went very well until he was observed doing it in the early hours of the morning, and a gentleman in blue uniform arrived, and he was arrested. First thing I knew was when I arrived at the court in the morning, which was in Redbridge in North East London, and there were camera crews and reporters hanging around. And I really felt that perhaps my reputation had reached an all-time high, but it wasn't because of me, it was all because of him. And it took us about 2 minutes to send him off to the Central Criminal Court, which you will all know is the Old Bailey. And that was the end of that. The public gallery cleared, all the reporters disappeared, and we got on with the real work of the day. But my name appeared in the Evening Standard, the Times, the Daily Mail, and so I thought, well, there you go, that's not bad for 2 minutes work. So every criminal case, as I say, all motoring offences ends up in the magistrate's court. Some of you may have unintentionally infringed road traffic laws over the years and made your guest appearances, all sorts of things, from driving without a proper license, speeding and whatever. I should tell you that I am a non-driver. I have never driven in my life, with or without a license, before somebody asks later on. And it used to give me great pleasure to disqualify people who had the privilege of a driving license, but had decided to mess about with it. And that was the end of that. But here's a little story that occurred at Southend Court, and it taught me a lesson not to make presumptions. It was a road traffic court, and a particular matter was called on. In came a young fellow. I say young fellow, everybody's a young fellow to me these days. He was about 20 something, and behind him came a much older man who sat in the public gallery. So the young fellow pleaded guilty to whatever the offence was, and I said, well, I have to impose a fine, and that'll be however much it was. Can you pay that today? No, he said. Well, what about your father? I asked. And he looked at me. Father, he said. I said, yes. I said, the older gentleman who's sitting at the back. Oh, he said, that's not my father. That's my partner, he said. There was a silence in court for a couple of seconds, and I said, I don't mind what label you give him. Can he pay? And the gentleman nodded. I said, very good. Thank you very much. See the clerk afterwards. Well, at lunchtime, the clerk said to me, that taught you a lesson, didn't it? I said, yes, absolutely it did. And he said, you know, that will go round the staff here at the court in no time. I said, well, so it goes. But the important thing was that we got the money. Another big part of the work is drugs. Now, we all hear about drug cases. It's proliferated in a most frightening manner. And a lot of the work of the Magistrates' Court deals with drugs. Here's a little story for you. This also happened at Southend. There was a gentleman living in Brixton. And without being in any way racist, I have to tell you, he was black. You'll see why that's relevant in a moment. And he found the competition for selling his drugs in Brixton to be quite daunting. So he decided to try somewhere else and went off to Southend. What the attraction of Southend was, I have no idea. And as he was mooching about the streets selling his wares, a van drove up with Essex Constabulary on the side, and out got a couple of gentlemen in blue uniform. They promptly arrested him and asked his name. And being what they call in the drug world a chochem, he gave a false name. They then asked his address, and he gave what he believed to be a false address. However, it was something like 21 Marigold Gardens, and one of the officers said, I know where that is. Let's go round there. So they put him in the back of the van and went round to 21 Marigold Gardens, banged on the door, and a white female answered the door. Yes, she said. Well, they said, we've got your bloke in the back for drug dealing. Oh, she said, how many times have I told him not to do that? I've told him he'll get caught. He just doesn't listen. Well, they said, in that case, can we come in and search the house without a warrant? Oh, she said, you might just as well now. And they came in and found all the relevant paraphernalia for drug dealing. I won't tell you what they are because you might go out and equip yourself. And they arrested her as an accessory, took her outside, opened the back of the van. She looked in and said, well, I won't tell you what she said, but it was something like, who is that? And they said, that's your fellow. And she said, I've never seen him before. And he said, who's this? And they said, this is your girlfriend, isn't it? He said, I don't know her at all. Now, just imagine a court full of people on a Monday morning with the two of them standing in the dock. And the moral of the story was, buy one, get one free. And that's exactly what we had there. And the court was in absolute uproar. Anyway, I decided on their guilty pleas to send them up to a higher court called the Crown Court. And off they went to the Crown Court. She did not seek bail, that is to say her release pending sentence, but his advocate came up with a very interesting argument and said, well, you know, her fellow will be much more able to get to him if he's inside pending sentence. And I said, that's an ingenious argument, but the answer is no. And that was the end of that. So it can have its interesting side. Theft, any sort of theft, that goes to the magistrate's court, at least to start with, depending on the seriousness. Things that you and I call shoplifting, for example, is actually an offence under the Theft Act. I'm sure you all knew that. Clever people by the look of you. And, well, one or two anyway. I'm thinking about you, Mr. Oliver. So anything of that nature ends up in court. And there are times of the year when it's very busy. So just take this one. It's Horsefree Road Court, which was in the West End near St James's Park. And it's about the 22nd of December. A young couple come in who had been, if I can use the vernacular, doing the London stores prior to the, what I think people now call the Chagim in December/January. And they came in, they pleaded guilty to a number of thefts. I was handed their list of previous convictions, which I could use to paper the walls of the shul. There was so much of it. And we had to decide what we were going to do. And I came to the conclusion that I thought we would need pre-sentence reports from the probation service, who do a lot of hard work in that sort of thing. And that would take 3 weeks. Question is, what do we do with them during the 3 weeks? And it was drawn to my attention that they had 2 young children. So obviously I asked, well, what's happened with the kids? And an elderly lady in the public gallery was pointed out to me, referred to as grandma. I think that's an English expression for bubba. And I was told that she was looking after the children pro tem. So we nodded to each other. Anyway, I came to the conclusion that as it was the 22nd of December, the temptation to them to go out and continue offending was too great. And I decided that they had best be remanded in custody. Whereupon, and I hope nobody's easily offended here, the older lady stood up in the gallery and shouted through the glass at me, "You miserable old bastard," she shouted, walked out and slammed the door. Well, I'm used to that in shul, but obviously not in court. And the clerk said, "Would you like her brought back for contempt?" And I smiled and said, no, she's obviously a very good judge of character. So the point was quite obviously that she realized she was going to be lumbered with the kids through Xmas and the New Year, and every day they were going to say, "When are mummy and daddy coming home?" And unfortunately, she didn't have a very good answer. There is a separate court for youths, or youths, as they say in America. Those under 18, they have their own court because, well, there are certain publicity restrictions. There is a family court, which is also separate, dealing with family matters, including things like domestic abuse and that sort of thing, and child neglect and what have you. And I hope you can get the idea that therefore the court is a very busy one, and a very interesting one, where sentencing powers are inadequate. And I have to say I was quite upset because I could never send anybody into custody for more than 1 year, depending on the matters. They're sent up to the Crown Court, although I was paid an unusual compliment by the senior jailer at what was Woolwich Court. And he said to me one day, "When we know you're coming here, sir, we order an extra large van because you put everybody into custody and consequently we need to have the facility." I took that as a tremendous fillip. And when you used to read that the numbers of prisoners had reached an all-time high, I'm proud to say that for the most part, that was my doing. There we are. I think that's enough of the courts. Let's move on now to the tribunals. Tribunals are something rather different. Tribunals deal with people at what I might call the bottom of the socio-economic world. They're people seeking retention of state benefits, people who are unable to work due to ill health, people claiming disability benefits and all that sort of thing. Some of it shows the most vulnerable of humankind, and it's a very different approach that we take. The tribunal, although sometimes with a judge alone, normally sits with a medical member, and we have one here tonight looking in, or at least one, and a disability expert. So we sit as a group of 3, and yes, as you can imagine, we all hold hands and contact the living. And so we listen to these appeals and have to make decisions as to the extent of someone's disability and how limited they may be. There is also a branch of it, which I used to deal with, called the Child Support Appeals. I'm sure you've all heard of the Child Support Agency, now they're called the Child Maintenance Service, and their responsibility was adjudicating what normally an ex-husband or father had to pay for the children of a relationship or marriage. We'll come back to that in a little while. So again, as with all things, there is the interesting side, the ironic side of sitting in a tribunal. And on one occasion, I heard an appeal together with a doctor about someone who maintained that he had no use of his upper limbs, his arms, his wrists, his hands. He was in terrible trouble, or as I believe they say in your world, Gehakthasaurus. And so bad was it that when he came into the tribunal room, the clerk carried his coat because he was apparently unable to do so himself. So he sat down and he was asked questions by the doctor about his limitations and restrictions with his hands and his arms and all this performance. And as I sat there and listened, the cynic inside me said, "This doesn't sound right." So when the doctor finished, I said to the man, "You must excuse me if I ask you a personal question, particularly as I'm bearded, but I notice that you're clean shaven." "Yes," he said. I said, "Do you wet shave or dry shave?" "Well," he said, "I wet shave." I said, "And do you have any difficulties doing that?" "No," he said, "I don't." He said, "I do it 3 or 4 times a week because the wife's uppity about it. But no, I don't." He said, "Why are you asking me these stupid questions about shaving?" "Well," I said, "Mr. So-and-so, you know, it may not be so stupid, because I'm wondering how someone who claims to have no use of the upper limbs could wet shave by applying the lava or foam, using the blade, and not cut his face to pieces in the process. There was a silence for a couple of seconds, and you could see the penny drop. And he said, "You've caught me, haven't you?" "No," I said, "you've caught yourself." I said, "If you'd have told me that there's an electric razor and your wife shaves your face 2 or 3 times a week, I'd have believed that." Well, he said, "There's no point in me sitting here any longer." And he got up, put his coat on that he couldn't deal with before, and walked out. We also deal with housing benefit appeals. Thank God I suspect none of you know much about housing benefit. It's a benefit paid to those who have difficulty in meeting their housing costs. It used to be dealt with exclusively by the local authorities, but it now tends to come under the umbrella of universal credit. We won't talk about universal credit tonight because you might see me say words which would be inappropriate and lose my temper. It's a little bit of a sad story. Anyway, there I was at Enfield Housing Benefit Tribunal one day. Enfield, you should know, covers geographically the N16 and the E5 areas. I'm sure I need say no more. And in come a young couple, Hasidic couple, who had applied for housing benefit to Hackney Council and been refused. Why had they been refused? Because they said they had an amount of capital in excess of the statutory permitted limit, but their explanation as to why they had it didn't meet muster. So Hackney Council refused their claim and they appealed. And they came in dressed as you would expect a Hasidic couple to be. They looked at each other and I could almost read the minds which said, "Oh, we'll be all right here with him." Ha! Some chance. Nobody's all right with me. So I spoke to the fellow, Mr. So-and-so, and I said, "So tell me about this money." Well, he said, "It belongs to somebody that I used to know years ago. We were in a rabbinical training academy together." I said to him, "Do you mean you were in yeshiva?" "Oh," he says, "you know what a yeshiva is?" I said, "Well, look at me. Do I not look as if I might know what a yeshiva is?" Anyway, and he said this was a few years ago now in a place called Bnei Brak. Yes, I said, I've been there. I know Bnei Brak. Anyway, what came out of it was this, that they got friendly over there. The other chap lived there. And after our fellow left and came back to England, they used to keep in touch 3 or 4 times a year, no more than that. And the chap in Bnei Brak wanted to start a business at some stage here, and so had provided the funds to his chum so that they were safely in an English bank, ready for the big day. "I see," I said. And again, the suspicion began to rise. I said, "So you've not really had an awful lot to do with the man in the years since you left the yeshiva?" "No," he said, "I haven't." I said, "Are you related to him?" "No," he said. I said, "By blood?" "No." I said, "What about by marriage?" And there was a little pause and he said, "Sort of." So I said, "Well, what does sort of mean?" And he said, "He married my sister." So I looked at him, I said, "It's Gavena Shvoga." For those of you who are not Yiddish speakers, it means, so he's actually your brother-in-law. "Yes," he said, "you could call him that." "Righto," I said, "now I'm going to tell you what actually happened." He said, "You're going to tell me?" I said, "I'm going to tell you." I said, "Your chum over there He's made money and he doesn't want the Israeli tax authorities to know. So he's looked for a fall guy, found you, and sent the money out of the country to avoid paying the tax. As if that must constitute a conspiracy to defraud the revenue of a foreign country. Well, the poor chap looked very uncomfortable, to say the least of it, as did his good lady wife. And he was silent for a bit. And I said, maybe you should go out and think about whether you want to go on with this appeal. So they trotted out, and the clerk said to me, how did you work that one out? Oh, I said, call it intuition if you like. Anyway, 10 minutes later, they came back and he said, I'd like to withdraw my appeal. I said, very good. I said, appeal withdrawn. Well, he said, are you going to report this to the authorities? Oh, I said, don't know about that. Haven't thought that far. He said, well, how will I find out? Very simple, I said. If early one morning some men in blue uniform come banging on your door, you can know that I told them and they took it seriously. I said, that's all for today. I have other appeals waiting. Thank you very much. Off he went. The clerk said, do you want it reported? I said, no. I said, no. I said, he's learned his lesson. He won't play games like this again. She said, that was amazing. I don't know how you did that. I said, oh, well, there you are. That's what I get paid for. Let's talk about child support appeals. But they also have their interesting side to them, because unfortunately, it is often the case in the experiences I had that the mother wouldn't let the father see the children, and therefore the father wouldn't put his hand in his pocket to support the children. Now, the two are totally unconnected, and it's all an assessment on income that the child support agency, as it used to be, makes. And in consequence of that, the fact that he doesn't see the children is, as they say, neither here nor there. And I was down in Colchester one day, and we had a self-employed painter and decorator, the sort of person who was meat and two veg to my incisors. And so he put in a set of accounts. I said to him, this is a remarkably low income you've declared to the revenue. Oh, he said, is it? I said, well, when you get paid for a job, how do you deal with it? Well, he said, very simple. He said, the checks are paying to the bank, and that's what I declare as my income. I said, right. I said, well, suppose you get paid cash for a job. Well, he said, that goes in my pocket, and I use it to buy food and pay the bills. Yes, I said, but how do you declare it to the revenue? They don't need to know about that. That's cash, he said. Well, I said, you might be surprised to learn, and you can guess where the conversation went. And our poor painter and decorator became a lot poorer as a result of the decision that we made. And it is quite interesting how people take what I might call misguided views. Going right to the other end of the scale, we had an accountant in front of us. Yes, an accountant. And he declared his assets. And for some reason or other, and don't ask me why, I said to him, I see you haven't declared any premium bonds. Do you have any? Well, he said, I do and I don't. I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, I've got the full £50,000 holding. He said, but I moved it out of my name so that she, referring to the mother of his children, so that she didn't know about it. And I said, well, what did you do? Well, he said, I've given them to a mate of mine, and we have a little deal that if any prizes arise, we share them 50-50, and he looks after the money through the bonds for me. And I said to him, are you aware that is illegal under the terms of the prospectus issued by the Lords Commissioners of Her Majesty's Treasury? Oh, yes, he said, of course I know it's illegal, but what am I supposed to do with the money? Right, I said. Well, the first question that crosses my mind then is, what would your professional institute say if they became aware that you were behaving in that way? The poor chap did not look happy. He could almost see the letter landing on his doormat from the Institute with the fancy crest on the back of the envelope telling him he's got problems. Anyway, we soon enough dissuaded him from opposing, and he withdrew his appeal as well. Those sorts of things were always very tough to deal with because of the venomous nature between the parties. But such is life. It's not always an easy one being a judge. They say a policeman's life is not a happy one. A judge's life can be equally strenuous. Now, I've been talking to you for 3/4 of an hour, and it doesn't seem like a minute. And I can see one or two of you are still awake. So I'm going to suggest, Mr. Oliver, that this is a very good point for me to stop and perhaps ask you to act as facilitator for anybody who's got any sensible questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. It was, I don't know what the word is. Interesting. It's a bit further than
scintillating is the word you want.
Yes,
Scintillating.
yes, very, absolutely. And I can imagine you can go on forever.
Is that an offer?
No.
I think it was a Longfellow who wrote a poem called The Brook, which says, "Men may come and men may go, but I go on forever." And I really don't think it'd be fair to your punters tonight. So let's see who's desperate to ask a question.
Well, you've got two very, very important people here who...
What, you and me?
You know, apart from us. Last week I was having lunch with David Levy, which is down on the level. I don't know whether you can see him. And we were talking about you. And then David told me about his wife, who was very, very close with you over the years. And I think she's here, isn't she? So would you like to have a... Do you knew David, but you knew Faith better?
Well, I think perhaps we should start with a question. Do you not?
Do you know David and Faith Levy?
Oh, right. No, I know more than one David Levy. What do you think?
I don't know. But her name isn't...
No, Faith. I know Faith, of course. Yes, they live in a big fancy house in Hampstead. They're lovely people. And,
but they're older
than me, so I don't really care. But hello to you both, wherever you are. And it's very nice that you found a few moments to join us. You didn't get a personal mention, Faith, but my goodness, was she tough.
Can't you tell us a few stories?
Well, there you go. Some of them will be true.
You might embarrass her. I don't know.
Well, of course, I want to embarrass her. Why shouldn't I?
Yeah, that's true. That's our forte.
Right. Are we going to get a question?
Right. Are there any questions?
So I'm going to ask a question, if I may.
No. Go on.
I'm going to ask anyway. You've obviously had a very long and illustrious career, and you've told us a few stories, which were really interesting. What was your hardest case, if you're able to share it, that you came across, and why did you find it the most challenging?
Oh, dearie me. When you say hardest, do you mean legally challenging?
I was actually thinking more personally challenging rather than legally challenging, so that you found...
Okay.
Yeah, in that way.
I wouldn't say it was the hardest, but it's one that comes to mind. As you can imagine, over the years, one clocks away in one's mind an array of them. This was where was that? Marylebone. A lady was brought in, a single mother of a little toddler, and she was found in a pedestrianised shopping centre, sitting on the floor with a number of empty wine bottles. And the child was running around unsupervised, and she was prosecuted for child neglect. And the first question I asked was, what's happened to the child? The child had been taken into care. Then I saw her previous convictions, and it wasn't the first time she'd done it. And it was pretty close to a point where I would have to send her away. And it was difficult because obviously a child needs a mother, but is this the sort of mother that the child wants? And I had to listen to various different arguments from people who were involved in expert childcare and that sort of thing. And it was quite emotionally draining. And as it happens, at the end, I gave her a suspended sentence. And by the time I'd finished talking to her, in amongst the flood of tears, that's hers, not mine, she got the message that she was so close on the brink of it all that she only had to put a foot wrong and that would be the end of it. And I think it shook her up by the look of it. I never saw her again, but that doesn't mean a thing.
Sure.
There was another one down somewhere or other, I can't remember where a single mother had a series of shoplifting offences, and she'd been on a suspended sentence, and she came back yet again with another shoplifting offence. And her advocate said, well, she has young children, surely you're not thinking of sending her into custody. I said, well, she should have thought about this before she committed yet another offence. And on that occasion, I did send her down. There we go.
Thank you very much. I'll say you, at the end of the day, you've got to make, as you said, difficult decisions that are right.
That's the thing with all of the jobs I did. They required making decisions, and if you can't make decisions,
you can't, any wrong job. Yeah. No,
right.
thank you. Thank you. Right, we have a question from Gwendolyn Lamb. Gwen, I'm going to just unmute you. There we go. Your line is.
Oh,
unmuted.
hello.
How about
Yes,
that?
hello. Good evening. That was very interesting. But have you been on a lot of criminal court cases with juries? I mean, jury trials.
No, I don't. I never sat with a jury. No, that would be too much of an encumbrance. And
Really?
I was never elevated to those, I don't know what you might call it, those pantheons. No, I would just sit on my own, get through the list and done. But jury trials are a totally different ball game.
Absolutely.
Well, just let me answer the question.
Yeah,
They
sorry.
run at a much slower pace, and it's far more complicated. So no, I was pleased not to have the worry of that. But thank you for your very kind question. Who's next?
I'm next.
Go on, David.
Okay. I'm actually waiting for, I've done these things before, and I'm actually waiting for a question that I get asked every time. And so far, nobody's asked it.
Okay, we're just warming up, you know.
Warming up is not a cremation.
Okay. Do you ever regret becoming a judge as opposed to becoming a rabbi, which a lot of people think you are?
That's a fascinating question. No, it is, because I'll have to tell you a little bit about my personal background. Well, the technical term is I was admitted to the role. I was, if you like, a fully qualified solicitor in June 1980. I suspect before some of the people here were even born, but anyway, June 1980. And at the end of that year, hello, Mrs. Oliver, do come in.
Hello, I might have a question in a minute.
Well, you might have a cup of tea for me. That would be more interesting. And at the end of that year, I was also successfully approved by the then Chief Rabbi, Lord Jacobovitz, Sefer Sadet B'Kodesh Livrocha, to officiate in United Synagogue shuls and those over which he had dominion. And there was a time when I was thinking of giving up the law and going into the Rabbonis full time. So I went to see the Chief Rabbi, and he said to me, don't do it. He said, you've got the best of both worlds. He said, but if you don't believe me, go and see the new and upcoming rabbi at Dunstan Road in Golders Green. His name is Jonathan Sachs. Go and see what he has to say. So I went round to see Jonathan Sachs. I remember it very well because it was the fast of Gedalia. And I said to him, I don't suppose you're going to offer me a cup of tea. And he laughed and he said, no. He said, but if you want to go into the kitchen and make yourself one, then do. I said, no. I said, I'm fasting as well. And we had a most interesting conversation. And he said this. He said, being a rabbi of a community has its ups and its downs. And he explained why. And he said, if you are just involved part-time, you won't get dragged into arguments and this, that, and the other. And he said, if you're asked to officiate somewhere and you don't want to, the answer is very simple, no. And you just say, I'm not available. And I thought about it and I thought, you know, something, there is a wisdom there. So I have had the best of both worlds, Baruch Hashem. I've made a reasonably respectable living in the law. And I've also had the great pleasure of officiating in a number of shuls across the country. Great Portland Street, where I was for 6 months on 2 occasions as locum Rav. Did a year in Hove. I did a lot of work in Ilford before I came here. So yeah, I don't even remember what your question was, but it probably was something along there, and I wittered on. Good. Shall we ask Mrs. Oliver what she wants to ask?
Yes. The question is, have you ever given a sentence to somebody that you've gone home afterwards and thought about and thought, I'm not sure that was the right thing, or you felt bad about what you said, or something like that? You regretted your decision.
The answer is no, because whatever decision I made, there was always an appeal mechanism to our higher court or tribunal. And if the fact was that the person was aggrieved, they could appeal my decision. And in 1 or 2 rare occasions, and they were rare occasions, my decisions were turned over. Not very often at all. And so I knew that whatever I did, at the end of the day, well, that was it. And one of my appraisers in the tribunal service said to me many, many moons ago, he said to me, you walk out, you go home, you have your dinner, you put on some music, or you watch television, or whatever it is, you put your feet up, and that's it. The day is done. And someone else will worry about the rest of it. And that was superb advice.
That's true, but you still might think about an action or something that you've said. It's all very well saying in theory that you're going to let it go and you're going to put it behind you, but you might think, I wonder, not.
I think probably the only thing I ever thought was perhaps I should have given somebody a stiffer sentence.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's next on the list?
Right. Thanks, Tina. We got Viv, and I can see Sydney. So I'm going to go to Viv first, and then go to Sydney, who I think was waving at me. So I'll come to him in a second. Viv, your line is unmuted.
Viv?
There we go.
Hi. When it changed from police cannot sit on juries, it changed that they can. What was your feelings about that?
Very simple, none at all, because I was never involved with juries. So the answer is, I'm afraid it's not a question with which I can deal. But thank you.
I just wondered. No, because I was annoyed because
Well, with greatest respect, madam, this is my evening, not yours. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah.
Is that Gwen wanting another?
Well, I'm going to go to Sydney first,
Okay.
and then I'm not sure if Gwen's got another question or I'll unmute.
No, it's a hand from the previous one.
Yeah, I think it might be Sydney. your line's unmuted.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Okay, we're actually old friends from Sinclair House from many years ago.
I don't have any friends, but thank you anyway.
Well, yeah.
What's the
You're
question?
ours if we weren't yours, so settle that. What I'm going to ask is, did you practice as a solicitor at the same time as being a judge? Was that allowable, and did you do that?
That's a good question. Okay, for those judges who are not appointed immediately full-time, they are part-time, and by far the majority of the judiciary are in fact part-timers. And I carried on practicing piecemeal as a solicitor until 2004, at which point I became so involved with my 2 judicial jobs that I gave it up voluntarily, I should say, and left it behind. I was blessed. I know she's not looking in tonight, but I was blessed with an amazing secretary. And I knew that I could go out for a day to sit in court and she would keep the show on the road without any trouble. And I would come back in the evening to the office, and where my desk was, there were 3 chairs in front of the desk, and there were 3 piles of files. The first one was, you must deal with these before you go home tonight. The second pile was, if you've got time, deal with these tonight, or if not, first thing tomorrow. The third pile was, they can wait. Don't get too bothered. It worked the system. When I used to go on holiday in the days when I could afford to go on holiday, as a pensioner, of course, it's a bit more difficult now. So when I used to go on holiday, she used to fax me things every day to wherever I was. And I'd come back to the hotel in the evening, and there'd be this wad of faxes, which I'd deal with and then send them back late at night for her to find in the morning. And I could see it was always the same hotel. I'm not going to tell you where it was. I mean, why should I advertise the Ramada in Jerusalem? And you could see the staff looking as if to say, who is this man with all these faxes going backwards and forwards to London? And I thought, if only they knew. There we are, sir. Nice to see you again, and wish you well. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
On the list?
All right. Okay, we're going to go to the Hartmans next. But for those on YouTube, if you do have a question on YouTube, if you just want to put it into the YouTube chat, then I will relay it for you. Okay, right, the Hartmans, you're unmuted.
Right. Hi, Shlomo. Have you, after sending some violent person down, ever had the need for police protection of any kind? Hello?
Where's he gone?
He's muted.
You've muted yourself, Shlomo. Shlomo.
Yeah, I'm back. How that happened?
Start again.
Right, no, I heard the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Many moons ago, I heard a disability appeal, and the chap making the appeal seeking benefits was known to be a small-time drug taker. And I worked out how much he was spending every week. And I asked him how, in the absence of any recognized source of income, he was able to pay for his fixes, I think they call them. And he looked me in the eye and he said, well, he said, I do a bit of thieving, don't I? Which, needless to say, impressed me no end as to his innovative qualities. So we refused his appeal, and some months later, I was waiting late one night at the bus stop, and who saunters along is my friend, the unsuccessful appellant. He looks me up and down and says, I know you, don't I? Do you, I said. Yeah, he said, you refused my benefits claim. That's right, I said. So I should tell you, he had the sort of shaved head and tattoos and all that sort of thing. So he said, you made a mistake there. Oh, I said, did I? Did you appeal my decision? No, he said. I said, well, there we are. I didn't make a mistake at all. And he looked me up and down again, and I can't tell you what he said, but it was something along the lines of going forth to procreate. And I said to him, no, I said, I was at the bus stop first. I suggest that you do the same thing. And he was so taken aback by my robust approach that he turned round and walked away. Nobody's going to intimidate me, not even Sylvia. Thank you very much. Next question.
Well, just before Gwen gets on, Sylvia, do you want to? Sorry.
Can I just ask what made you cross the Great Divide from Essex to Edgware?
Oh, I don't think that's at all relevant, but thank you for the question. We'll discuss that next time you invite me around for dinner.
Where is Essex? Where's Essex?
Well, there you go. Who's next?
Right.
Can I just stick in a quickie before Gwen?
Yeah.
One of the things beforehand, you said that you got very excited when you could send people down. Is that why you were known as the hanging judge?
No, I didn't say I was excited to send them down. I said I was excited to disqualify them from driving, which is a slightly different thing. Yes, at one court in particular, I was known as the hanging judge. I don't know how you know that, but
I saw the film.
But it's not although tonight we are somewhat relaxed and jocular, or at least you are. It's a job that requires a degree of seriousness, and it requires meting out punishment, as the case may be, which is one of the more demanding sides of the job. And again, if you can't do it, then you shouldn't be doing the job. No, I never went out of my way to actually incarcerate anybody. But if at the end of the day, the seriousness of the offence demanded it, either on plea of guilty or after trial, then that's what happened. And I was well known for the fact that I wouldn't sort of shy away from it, but I didn't promote it either.
Okay. Shall we go over to Gwen?
I'll bring Gwen back in. There we go.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Have you spent most of your time as a judge, as a district judge, or mostly as a magistrate? How is it panned out for you? Were you mostly a district judge?
Right, I was never a magistrate. I think I could say that perhaps 2 to 3 days a week I was a tribunal judge, and about 1 to 2 days a week I was a district judge.
And as a district judge, what was the maximum sentence that you could impose on a defendant? Say that's the word.
Right. Well, if you've been paying attention, I mentioned that earlier in the broadcast, and that was
I missed it. Yeah,
1 year. Or
1 year.
I felt particularly unpleasant, I could bring it up to 12 months. But that was the maximum. Thank you for your second and last question. Who else would like to ask something? Faith, are you going to come in and say hello?
Let's Faith come. David, you can demute yourself. Can we demute David?
Right, David Levy. Yeah, I'll just click the button. There we go. If you want to. There we go. There we are.
Faith's no longer here. She's had to do something.
Ah! David, how are you? You look wonderful in the half light.
Pardon me?
You look wonderful in the half light.
Oh yes, I do. Yes, I look good in the full light also. You look very
that 40-watt bulb is doing you the world of good.
Absolutely right.
Have you got any questions for me?
I haven't got any questions now. I'm a pure lay person now. I don't.
Well, he's from Newcastle. What do you expect?
Well, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, nice to see you. Please give Faith my fondest.
I will do.
And the checks in the post as we normally do.
Of course.
Right. Who else would like to ask anything? It's
I've got a serious question this time.
oh, don't be silly.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. If I want to bring the Yiddishkeit come into it, if a Jewish person comes in front of you that you would obviously know that is Jewish, can you be completely and utterly unbiased, I should say?
Unbiased,
Yes. Could you honestly? Because if I was in your position and the Jewish bloke came in, I think he was innocent. I think, but I would, I would go through it, but I would want him to be innocent. Can you honestly and truthfully say no, they're like anybody else?
What I would see in front of me would be a person. You should understand that judges taking their oath of office say that they will deal with all manner of folk without fear or favour, affection or ill will. And the purpose of that oath is to ensure that there is no such bias. Let me give you a little example. I was sitting at Stratford Court in East London doing a road traffic list, and a matter was called on, and in walked a gentleman with long pairs, black stockings, and the whole accoutrements. And he got into the dock, and he, apart from the fact he spoke the most exquisite English, he raised a very interesting point of law, which neither I nor the prosecutor had thought of. And it was great fun having him there because he had a lot to say which was very pertinent to the matter. And it was interesting to see the prosecutor's reaction to being caught on the hop, as indeed I was too. And we actually had to take the books out and have a look at the wording of a regulation. And it was with great pleasure that I found him not guilty. Not because he was a frum Jew, but because the law was on his side. And that's what matters. That's what I'm there for. You could say, well, is it the case that every person who comes into the docking court who's black must automatically be guilty? And the answer is, of course not. Is it right that every man who's accused of assaulting a woman is automatically guilty? And the answer is, of course not. You have to keep an open mind. There's nothing to say that you can't use that open mind to investigate further and probe deeper in any situation. But it doesn't mean that you're automatically weighted on one side or the other. Now, you might say, if you wanted to ask a slightly different question, which I think you're about to ask, so I'll ask it for you. What happens, for example, if I have a regular prosecutor in front of me who, to put it bluntly, gets on my damn nerves and never has his or her papers in order and is always in a muddle? I'm not going to mention the person's name. The answer is, well, you just have to put that aside and listen carefully to what's been said. And similarly, if there was a young defence advocate, be it a he or a she, who was, what shall we say, somewhat inexperienced and was not perhaps as on the ball as I would expect, do I automatically find the client guilty because they got a lousy lawyer? Answer, no. And I did have that at Highbury not so long ago. A very nice young lady advocate who was a complete and utter disaster. And afterwards, I kept her back in the court with the clerk present and told her, if she goes on like that, someone somewhere will eventually bite her head off. And she really needs to get her act together. which I said in a relatively pleasant manner for me, but she got the message. Right.
But if if a Jewish boy comes in and he looks at you, realizes that you're Jewish, and he gives you a
hang on. How would he realise that? Yeah, go on.
Well, you did tell me that you wore a couple.
Of course I do, all the time.
Right. So obviously, when somebody walks in, he knows that you're Jewish. So you don't hide being Jewish, do you?
No.
Right. So he walks in, sees that you're Jewish, and gives you a wink, like one of the boys.
That's never ever happened.
Really?
No. Nor has anybody made any recognisable sign of the Masonic movement or anything like that at all. No, it's never ever happened. And even if it did, it wouldn't make any difference. If I better not use names, but if it was someone that I knew, I would automatically transfer the case to another court. Yeah. That did happen many years ago when a local businessman who'd been somewhere else and committed a road traffic offence came into court, and he looked up and saw me sitting there, and his face was a picture. And I said, well, Mr. So-and-so, I think this had better go into court number 2, do you not think? And they transferred the case. No, there we are. Right, enough bias. Shall we take one more question?
All right, last chance, everybody. So there's no hands up, but the first one to put your virtual hand up.
Oh, Cyril, we've got Cyril down the
Okay, perfect. Right, let me unmute Cyril.
All right.
Okay, Cyril, there we go.
Yeah. Good evening. Fascinating and lovely to listen to your experiences. In the early days when you were first starting, did you often have to consult with other magistrate? No, you weren't a magistrate, but others on sentencing? I mean, you couldn't have known everything. So is it the clerk of the court who guides you, or can you just elaborate on that?
Certainly. Okay. There is something called the Sentencing Council, formerly the Sentencing Guidelines Council, which is under the chairmanship of the Lord Chief Justice.
Right.
And they have, over the years, published guidelines for sentencing on, well, there's not many offences left where they haven't touched them. And what the guidelines say is this: that having looked at the evidence, you have to look at factors that may determine sentencing. Certain factors which make sentencing more serious, others on the other side of it which make it less serious. And then there is what's called a starting point, and then there is a range of sentencing. So, for example, if it was a fines matter, there might be a starting point of £250, but a range of 150 to 500. And depending on the seriousness of the matter, you then put it there. And you have to give reasons in court. You can't say, well, you're an ugly so-and-so, your eyes are too close together, I'm going to give you the top whack of the fine. It doesn't work that way. You have to explain in open court why it is that you're making your decisions. That goes with everything, whether it's bail, whether it's whatever it is. You can't just sort of say, well, my decision is so-and-so and that's it, because the clerk needs to keep a record of what those reasons are.
Right.
Now, to go back a little on your question, Cyril, when I started out, there were occasions when I did ask for some guidance and views from others more senior, because that's what they're there for. And there's nothing wrong with asking someone's opinion, but the decision at the end of the day was always mine and mine alone.
Wow. All right. I accept that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I will wave to you from the window, but I can't quite see you. This gentleman's a neighbour of mine, so.
So right. That's bias, isn't it?
Well, it's a bit like your wife. When you go shopping, it's bias this, bias that.
Yeah, always. Right. Any other questions?
No, that was our last one.
Okay. Right. Well, can I just finish with just a short question? You retired a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
I retired in May of last year.
Last year. Okay. Do you miss it, or are you enjoying retirement?
The tribunal work, which was always much heavier and required a lot of preparation, I don't miss. The courts, yes, I do miss the courts. And we could always make it into a bit of a fun day. The very last day that I sat in court, in fact, I have my court list, which I preserved. I don't know if you probably can't see it the way this is. And the very last case was someone who was in custody. I can't remember what he was there for. And his advocate appeared, and I said, I'm awfully sorry, I don't actually have a note of your name. And the advocate, who was a bright, shiny new barrister in a fancy suit, said to me, my name is Tom Jones. And the temptation to say, it's not unusual, but I decided to refrain from doing that, as it was my last case. But what was quite amusing about the whole thing was that he was advancing grounds upon which I could release his client on bail. And he said he has an address to go to in a place called Hainault. No, I said it's pronounced Hainault. Oh, is it? He said, yes. He said, right, and the address is 21 Marigold Gardens or whatever it was. He said 1G. I said, no, it's IG. And he said, forgive me, sir. He said, you seem to have an incredible knowledge of the geography of the area. I said, well, having lived up the road for 30 years, it wasn't too difficult. Oh, he said, I see. And I said to the chap, I said, I'm not sure whether to release you or not, but this is my very last case after 22 years on the bench. So perhaps on this occasion, I will show a little sympathy and I will grant you bail. And then I put on my stern face and said, but I do want you to know that if I hear that you have breached any of your bail conditions, I will have no hesitation in suggesting to my successor colleague that you be remanded for the maximum length of time possible. And the chap went, oh, thank you, sir, yes, all right. And off he went.
That's very good. So I'm not sure what your answer was, but I can imagine anyway. Anyway, thank you very, very much. I mean, that was it's probably one of the funniest evenings we've had for a very, very long time. So thank you very, very much, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions and answers and stories for the next one. So thank you very much again, Shlomo.
My pleasure.
Okay, now I have to tell you that next week will probably be the last one for this season, because then we've got with Yom and Orion, so we have to take out everything through September. So please come along then, and then maybe we're not sure how we're going to do it after that. But please try and come next week, sorry, and because it will certainly be the last one until October anyway. So next week we have a gentleman called, he's actually Rabbi Arya Sampson. Arya, who said that?
I did. I know him.
Oh, you know him, okay.
Very interesting fellow.
He is. He's a member of our shul.
Yes. That's not why he's interesting.
but he's a bit younger than us, isn't he? Aria is an accredited member of the British Association of Counselling Psychotherapy and has a rabbinical ordination. He counsels individuals and couples worldwide on Zoom. He is passionate about sharing psychological insights and the author of Go to Yourself, Transformation Through Jewish Wisdom and Psychology. He has a YouTube channel, Aria Sampson. So I think we will be ending on a really good, I'm not saying today, but Shlomo was excellent, but we're looking at Aria at being on a par at least. So thank you very much, everybody.
Can I just add one thing, please?
Yes.
There's an elderly couple that have moved into Edgware called Norma and Ray Newman. And they happen to be neighbours of mine, but I'm trying to dissuade them. And they've joined Edgware United Synagogue. And I'd like to send a little welcome to them and to say what a pleasure it is to see them out of custody tonight and joining us for the event. And I hope that next time I see them in the vestibule of Eaton Court, they'll avoid me and I'll avoid them.
Is that no Ray?
That's right. Yes.
Ah, right. Yes.
He's removed the W and put an R there because normally it's no way. But there we go.
He does look like he's just come out, doesn't he?
He does. But there you are. You haven't met his wife yet.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We are going as our usual. We'll continue for as long as you want to stay. There'll be whiskers coming around shortly, malt whiskers. Oh, didn't you know?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Are there kichels as well?
Yes, we've got kichels, we've got everything. So I'll say good night to everybody. I'll still be here, but if you want to leave. If you want
so I've ended the live stream. We are no longer streaming live to YouTube.